Back, I'm the son of a NYPD officer, so I always stand with the NYPD. Wait, am I having some audio issues? Am I good? Am I good? Okay. My dad was an NYPD officer, so I always stand on the side of law enforcement. I'm proud of it. And another guy who's heavy duty law enforcement his whole life joins me right now, along with Frank Morano. That's John Iannarelli. John's a retired FBI agent and author. And Johnny, thanks for joining us again.
Thanks for having me.
Before we get started on all your area of expertise, but I don't know if you saw this clip of two shop owners in Cleveland. Two guys, they own an Italian specialty store, and the looters came up to their store. They came out the front door with shotguns in their hands, and all these little video gamers went running right away. They didn't break the windows. So is this a time where law enforcement, National Guard, FBI, federal agencies have to come in and protect business before we have citizens killing citizens?
Well, I think a lot of the communities around the country have underestimated how much is going on and the hesitancy to call in the National Guard because of the perception of militarization. I mean, do you care about the military being on the street or the rioters being on the street? I take the military any day over the rioters.
Yeah, John, let me ask you a little bit about, because in addition to being a retired FBI agent, you were also a police officer yourself in San Diego. Let me ask you a little bit about the initial incident regarding George Floyd. There seems to be very little defense for Officer Chauvin's actions at all here. And we heard from the attorney representing the Floyd family that rather than charging this officer with second or third degree murder, they probably could have charged him with first degree murder. Based on your viewing of this video or these videos from different angles, do you think that's the case?
No, and let me give you a little context for that. So aside from having been a cop and an FBI agent, I have 51 weeks of academy training under my belt, but I'm also an attorney. First degree murder, you have to go out and have the intent specifically to kill a specific person. That's not the case here. We didn't know prior to the radio call where that officer was going to be going that day. So you're not going to meet those criminal elements. But the subsequent murder charges of second, third, etc., carry very heavy weights as well. So it's a game of semantics and numbers, and I wouldn't worry about that. The fact of the matter is, by looking at that video, there is nothing I see that's in compliance with any level of police training. That officer is doing time.
Do you allow, we saw one story that came out on Friday that this police officer and George Floyd may have actually been security guards at the same club at the same time, and their tenure there may have overlapped. Do you allow for the possibility that these two may have known each other, had a prior relationship, and this was perhaps Officer Chauvin's way of settling some old score?
That's a great point, Frank. And what that explains is why they're so important to not rush into an investigation. Everybody's clamoring for charges. Charges are coming. They came within a few short days, but you need to vet out those sort of things because that could make a difference. Hypothetically, if there had been an argument between the two of them and threats were made at that time, maybe you would get different types of charges in the long run. That's why I understand people being upset by this. These investigations are not as quick as they appear. And more importantly, if you charge and the person says, you know what, this is a sweetheart deal compared to what I'm facing, I'm going to plead guilty. You don't get to go back and then change the charges later on. Then people would be really disappointed. I recognize patience is hard in these times, but there's a reason it takes time to do these things.
Yeah, no, John, I really appreciate you joining us. My father was NYPD too. We had a rally behind a small business owner here in New York last week, and we all got out there. We had a few hundred people show up. There was a battalion of cops, okay? And these cops, they don't want to lock anybody up for opening this business. They're sympathetic to it. The cops were so cool about it, but they got a job to do. They got orders from our, tyrannical mayor here in New York that if the guy opens his store and doesn't shut it, we want him arrested. So they literally were going to arrest the guy. And at the rally, just a little thing, right? I go over to the cops and say, hey, you know, my dad's former NYPD. We don't want to have any problems. We're going to have a group of people here. Can we use a microphone? No. No amplified sound. Sorry. But okay, fine. Can we use a bullhorn? No, you can't do that. Now I look up at the news yesterday, and they have a whole stage set up in New York where these Antifa protests are up there on mics and speakers and everything else. It's almost like there's two sets of laws now. The law-abiding people on one side and the people who are looting and rioting on the other side. It's nuts.
Well, there's no question that people in Antifa are breaking the laws. The cops are looking at you and the people you're with, and they realize you're going to follow orders and you're not going to riot and hurt other people if they tell you you can't do something. They do have to use some caution in dealing with these other groups, because when you look at the resources the cops have and how many of the violent protesters that are rioting, not the protesters that are trying to make a statement. The law enforcement is supporting of people. You want to go on the street and make a statement about what has happened, how you feel, what should occur. That's one thing, and that's your God-given right under our Constitution. It's the violent rioters that we're concerned with. Those people, if the cops confront and say, hey, put away the bullhorn, next thing you know, they may be overrun. It's another reason that more resources need to be brought in to quell this so it stops. Enough is enough already.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Go ahead, Frankie.
No, based on what you're seeing, John, in terms of how the different cities are handling either the protests or the riots, whether it's in Atlanta, whether it's in Detroit, whether it's in Minneapolis, whether it's in Chicago, or whether it's in New York City, what do you think local officials could be doing better, if anything, in order to get these demonstrations under control? Certainly seeing the St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City vandalized with graffiti, seeing St. John's historic Episcopal Church in Washington, D.C. set on fire. I mean, I think most Americans look at that and you just shake your heads with a mix of disgust and sadness. How can local police departments or local officials do a better job quelling this unrest?
When I hear not necessarily police departments, because they have the number of personnel they have, those numbers don't change. When I think of it, really the mayors in these cities, and I hear things like, well, we didn't anticipate these kind of problems. It's not like we haven't had riots before for volatile events. Ferguson, Rodney King, even going back to the 60s with the riots in Newark and other places. You know when times can be tense and to have the appropriate resources. I think in a lot of these situations, the police departments get hamstrung by the politicians. They're worried about how things appear. They want to give people their safe spaces to be able to speak. Again, lawful protest, cops have zero problem. They're there to support and make sure the First Amendment is allowed. It's the rioters that politicians have to focus on and recognize all they're doing is hurting their city, the citizens who pay taxes, and everybody else, especially as we're trying to come back from COVID.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely out of control. Johnny, I want to thank you for coming on. Stay safe out there, you and the family, and maybe next week we can check in with you again, and you can tell us what your insights are on what's happening, and hopefully it'll stop.
Hopefully it'll all be over by then, if not sooner. Thanks, guys.
All right, thanks a lot. That's John Iannarelli, retired FBI agent, author, and you know, Frankie, you hear these guys that are trained law enforcement, and even they're stunned at how little some of these mayors and governors are doing to support the people. I mean, I heard they overran a precinct, I forget where, but somewhere, and I don't think that would go down in New York, quite frankly.
Well, you wouldn't think so, but I also wouldn't have thought that setting police vehicles on fire with Molotov cocktails would have been something that went on in New York, but that's precisely what we saw. This wasn't just a passive police vehicle. In the incident that took place on Saturday, these people, two of whom are lawyers, by the way, they threw this Molotov cocktail into a police vehicle that actually had police officers in it. So, I mean, anarchy may be something that we're used to seeing in places like Somalia, but it's right here in New York. There was even looting in Manhattan. As bad as the violent demonstrations had gotten here in New York City, Up until yesterday, we hadn't seen looting. But yesterday in Manhattan, we saw looting in the East Village, in Soho, and in Midtown. So, I mean, this is out of control.
Wow. All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break here. We're going to come back. We're going to wrap it up, lighten the mood a little bit. We're going to do the WTF, what the facts, when Frankie breaks down any mistakes that I've made. A little update on the studio also right after this.